She took a shaky breath and finally spoke. How did you know? Keanu turned his head slightly, offering a small smile. Let's just say I've been in places like this before. That answer did nothing to calm the questions racing through her mind, but something in his voice reassured her. He wasn't scared because he understood. Somehow, he had known exactly what to say, exactly how to handle whatever had been lingering in that space. The elevator doors opened, and as they stepped into the lobby, Claire realized how different she felt. The embarrassment she had felt earlier about misjudging Keanu now seemed trivial. What she had just witnessed went beyond wealth, beyond status. It had reminded her that sometimes there's more to a person and a place than what meets the eye. Her manager rushed toward them, his face full of nervous energy. "Mr. Reeves, how was the penthouse? I hope Claire provided excellent service." Claire braced herself, wondering how Keanu would respond. But instead of mentioning her initial rudeness, he simply nodded. "She did," he said simply. "It's a beautiful property." The manager beamed, oblivious to the unspoken truth between them. "Fantastic. Do you need any time to think it over?" Keanu paused for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I won't be making an offer." Claire wasn't surprised. The penthouse had never been the real reason he came here. As he turned to leave, Claire felt an unexpected urge to say something. She had spent years in this business, always focused on selling, always reading clients based on their appearance and attitude. But today had shown her something different, something she wouldn't forget. "Thank you," she said softly. Keanu glanced back, giving her one last knowing smile. "Take care, Claire." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Claire with a story she would never fully understand, but would remember forever. She couldn't shake the image of Keanu Reeves sitting there, drenched, looking at her with something that wasn't anger, wasn't disappointment, just understanding. Why? Why had he reacted that way? Most people would have lashed out, embarrassed her in return, demanded consequences. But he hadn't. He had chosen kindness when she had given him nothing but disrespect. And that choice haunted her more than anything else. As she turned a corner, she noticed something up ahead. A figure leaning against a parked motorcycle, hands in his pockets, as if waiting for something. Her steps slowed, her breath caught. Keanu Reeves. He hadn't left after all. He was standing there, like he had known she would come this way. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached, every step feeling heavier than the last. Why was he still here? And what was he about to say? Sophie's breath hitched as she slowed her steps. Keanu Reeves stood just a few feet away, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable under the soft glow of the streetlights. The city buzzed around them, cars honking in the distance, footsteps echoing on the pavement, but at that moment, it felt like everything had gone quiet. Why was he still here? Her instincts told her to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen him, to avoid whatever conversation was about to happen. But her feet betrayed her, pulling her forward as if drawn by some invisible force. Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying her, and then in the same calm voice he had used before, he said, "I thought you could use some fresh air." Sophie swallowed hard. "You waited for me." He gave a small shrug. "I had a feeling you weren't ready to go home yet." She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. He wasn't wrong. The weight of the night still pressed against her, making it impossible to imagine just walking through her apartment door and pretending nothing had happened. She glanced down, embarrassed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." For a moment, they just stood there. Sophie wanted to ask him why he was being so kind, why he hadn't reacted the way most people would have. But before she could, Keanu spoke again. "Do you know why I didn't get angry back there?" She looked up at him, unsure how to answer. She shook her head. "I didn't understand. Anyone else would have." She trailed off, unable to even finish the thought. Keanu exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I've been where you are. I know what it's like to have a breaking point." Sophie frowned, caught off guard. "You? But you're... She stopped herself before saying something ridiculous like asterisk, "You're Keanu Reeves asterisk." He gave a small, knowing smile. People assume I have it all together, but I had bad days. Really bad ones. I've been in places where I felt like the whole world was against me, and I've made mistakes too. She searched his face, looking for any sign that he was just saying this to make her feel better. But he wasn't. He meant it. A lump formed in her throat. "I didn't mean to." "I know," he said gently. "That's why I didn't react the way you expected." Sophie felt something tighten in her chest. This man, this asterisk incredibly famous asterisk man, was standing in front of her, telling her he understood, that he had felt what she was feeling now. But before she could process it, something unexpected happened. A voice from across the street called out, "Hey, that's him." Sophie turned just in time to see a small group of people pointing in their direction. Paparazzi. Within seconds, a couple of them rushed forward, cameras flashing. Sophie's stomach dropped. The restaurant incident had already been humiliating enough. Now this? Keanu barely reacted. He let out a small sigh, like this was something he had dealt with 1,000 times before. "I was hoping we'd have a little more time," he murmured under his breath. Sophie's pulse quickened. More time for asterisk what asterisk? The first paparazzo reached them, camera already up. "Keanu, what happened back there in the restaurant? We heard a waitress threw water at you. Is it true?" Another one chimed in, snapping more pictures. "Why didn't you press charges? Are you protecting her?" Sophie felt her body go rigid. Asterisk, this isn't happening asterisk. Keanu turned slightly, putting himself between her and the growing crowd. His voice was steady, calm, but firm. "There's nothing to report, just a misunderstanding." One of the reporters wasn't satisfied with that. "But why'd you leave so fast? Were you embarrassed?" Keanu shook his head. "No." He glanced at Sophie for a brief second before turning back to the reporters. "I left because there was no reason to make a bad moment worse." Keanu Reeves walked into the high-end real estate office with his usual quiet confidence. Dressed in a simple black jacket and jeans, he didn't look like your typical wealthy buyer. There were no flashy watches, no entourage, just a man browsing properties. The receptionist barely glanced up before giving him a polite but dismissive smile. A young real estate representative named Claire noticed him from across the room. She was ambitious, always looking to impress the high-paying clients that walked through the doors. To her, Keanu just looked like another window shopper, someone wasting time in a place meant for serious buyers. With a forced smile, she approached him, barely disguising her impatience. "Sir, these listings are for exclusive clients," she said, her tone firm but polite. "I'd be happy to show you something, more within your range." Keanu raised an eyebrow, but remained calm. "I was actually interested in the penthouse suite," he said casually, pointing to the most expensive listing on the board. Claire couldn't help but chuckle. The penthouse was worth millions, far beyond what she assumed this man could afford. She had dealt with dreamers before, people who wanted to walk through luxury homes just to get a taste of a life they couldn't have. It was a waste of time, and she didn't have any to spare. "I understand," she said, trying to sound patient, "but that's a highly exclusive property. Perhaps I could show you something else." Keanu smiled, sensing her doubt but not reacting to it. "Are you sure I can't see it?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. Claire sighed, already regretting this interaction. She was about to shut him down completely when her manager suddenly appeared, eyes widening in shock. He rushed over, looking horrified at what was happening. "Mr. Reeves," he blurted out, his voice filled with panic. "I had no idea you'd be visiting today." Claire's stomach dropped. "Mr. Reeves?" As in Keanu Reeves. Her breath caught as she slowly turned to face the man she had just dismissed. And then in that single moment, she realized her huge mistake. Claire felt her face heat up as a wave of embarrassment washed over her. She had just brushed off one of the most famous actors in the world, assuming he was just another nobody. Her mind raced, replaying every word she had said to him, every dismissive glance. How had she not recognized him? Sure, he wasn't dressed like the typical billionaire client, but that was the thing about Keanu Reeves. He never tried to show off. Her manager's sudden shift in tone only made things worse. The man, usually composed and professional, was now practically stumbling over his words. "Mr. Reeves, we are absolutely honored to have you here," he gushed, offering a handshake. "Had I known you were coming, I would have personally arranged a private showing of any property you're interested in." Keanu, ever the gentleman, shook his hand with a polite smile. There was no sign of anger or arrogance in his expression. If anything, he seemed amused by the situation. "No worries," he said, glancing at Claire for a brief second before turning back to the manager. "I was just hoping to take a look at the penthouse, if it's still available." Claire's heart pounded. She had just tried to steer him toward a much lower-end listing, assuming he couldn't afford anything grand. Now, standing there in stunned silence, she realized she had misjudged him completely. Her manager nodded eagerly. "Of course, sir, absolutely. Claire here will be more than happy to show you around." Claire's stomach twisted at the words. She didn't know whether to be grateful for the second chance or terrified of how badly she had already ruined this interaction. But there was no getting out of it now. "Right this way," she said quickly, trying to recover, leading Keanu toward the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, trapping them in a quiet space, Claire finally dared to steal a glance at him. He didn't seem upset, but there was something in his eyes, something calm yet knowing, like he had encountered people like her before. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. "I'm really sorry about earlier," she admitted, her voice softer than before. "I shouldn't have assumed." Keanu gave a small smile but said nothing. Instead, he looked ahead as the elevator ascended, leaving Claire to wonder just how much she had miscalculated. As the elevator climbed higher, Claire felt the weight of silence pressing down on her. She stole another glance at Keanu, hoping for some reassurance, but he remained calm, his expression unreadable. That only made her more nervous. She had spent years perfecting her ability to read wealthy clients, their body language, their moods, their expectations. But Keanu wasn't like them. He didn't exude entitlement or impatience. Instead, he seemed perfectly content letting the awkwardness hang in the air. Keanu didn't say anything. His eyes remained fixed on a spot across the room. Claire followed his gaze, but there was nothing there, just the vast, elegantly designed living space. Still, something felt off. A sudden chill drifted through the air, and Claire instinctively rubbed her arms. The thermostat hadn't changed, yet the room felt colder. A deep unease settled in her stomach, but she wasn't about to let her imagination get the best of her. "I'm sure it's just a wiring issue," she said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "The building is older than it looks. Sometimes these things happen." Keanu finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Does this happen a lot?" Claire hesitated. She wanted to say no, to brush it off, but the truth was she didn't know. She had only heard whispers, stories from other agents who had brought potential buyers here, only for them to leave unsettled. But those were just stories, weren't they? She shook her head. "Honestly, I've never seen anything like this myself." Keanu didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something unseen. Then, without warning, he called out, "You can stop now." Claire's heart nearly stopped. "Excuse me," she asked, confused. Keanu didn't answer her. He was still staring into the open space, his expression calm but certain. Then, something moved. It was subtle, so subtle Claire almost didn't notice. A single chair near the grand piano shifted slightly, scraping against the polished floor with a quiet but unmistakable sound. Claire's entire body went rigid. That wasn't possible. She sucked in a sharp breath, her mind racing for a logical explanation. Maybe it was the ventilation system, or maybe she had imagined it. but the look on Keanu's face told her otherwise. Then, in a voice steady and firm, he spoke again. "I know you are here." Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. Keanu's voice was calm, steady, but the weight of his words sent a fresh wave of unease through her. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before she could, another sound filled the room. A soft creak, like footsteps pressing against the floor. Claire's breath caught. The chair that had moved before suddenly shifted again, this time with more force, scraping loudly across the marble. Claire took an instinctive step back, her mind struggling to rationalize what was happening. But Keanu didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the empty space in front of them. Then, a whisper. Faint, indistinct, but there. Claire's entire body tensed. She had no idea what the voice had said, but Keanu seemed to. His expression darkened slightly, not with fear, but with understanding. "This place doesn't belong to you anymore," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You need to let go." Claire's breath came in short, uneven bursts. Who were you talking to?" she managed to ask, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Keanu finally turned to her. "The previous owner never left," he said simply. Claire's stomach dropped. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as a joke, but nothing about this felt funny. Her mind flashed back to all the strange stories she had brushed off, buyers claiming to feel watched, unexplained noises, sudden chills in the air. She had always assumed it was just paranoia. But now she wasn't so sure. A sudden gust of cold air rushed past her, forcing her to take another step back. The lights flickered again, once, twice, and then everything stilled. The room fell into a suffocating silence, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the temperature in the penthouse shifted. The icy chill that had gripped the space began to fade. The tension in the air softened, like something unseen had finally loosened its hold. Keanu exhaled, nodding slightly. "It's done." Claire blinked, her body still rigid. What just happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu gave her a small, knowing smile. The truth was revealed. Claire didn't know what that meant, and part of her wasn't sure she wanted to. All she knew was that the penthouse no longer felt heavy, no longer carried that eerie presence. But as they stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, Claire swore she heard one last whisper. Soft, distant. "Thank you." Claire remained silent as the elevator descended, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She stole a glance at Keanu, who stood beside her, completely calm as if what they had just experienced was nothing out of the ordinary. But for Claire, it had changed everything. The penthouse no longer felt haunted, no longer carried that heavy, unspoken tension. But what did that mean? Had the stories been true all along? Had something, or someone, truly been there, waiting to move on?